Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be continuing with Scream Week with the beloved sequel Scream 2. Now, once again, this meant I had to pull out my Scream 5 film set Blu-ray collection, pop in Scream 2 to the 4K player, watch it on my television. I did that last night, and I have a lot of thoughts I want to share with you guys today. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Let's review Scream 2. So this was a film production that was very much rushed in order to sort of meet the demand. There was a really big mainstream reception, just overwhelmingly positive with big box office sales from the original film, and so they wanted to bring back as much of the core cast and crew as possible. So Kevin Williamson returned as writer, you had Wes Craven brought back as director, though there was a moment in time where Robert Rodriguez was one of the main considerations, but Craven decided ultimately that he really wanted to see through his own series, at least for the sequel. And then you obviously had a lot of the surviving cast, the main people. You have obviously Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, and Jamie Kennedy all brought back. So on paper, this makes a lot of sense, and this is something that continually would happen. There's so many horror movies where the first one would be really successful, and then like a year later, they would just start already pumping out sequels almost every single year. Friday the 13th comes to mind. Obviously, you had Nightmare on Elm Street. You had the Halloween movies. You had Saw, where every single year on Halloween, they would have a new release. And there can be a lot of negatives to that, but there's also a lot of positives about just forcing it through, I think, sometimes when it comes to horror. Not always, but I think sometimes filmmaking, especially in the United States, can just take way too long. And if you just have this push to just get it done, sometimes you can actually pump out more movies and come up with new and creative ideas. Because I think creativity really only works at its best when it's up against the wall and it is having practical demands of its own, of its time, of its budget. When you have these sort of limitations, that's what creates new and exciting avenues to explore within horror. You come up with new ideas and new ways of approaching material that you really want to realize on the screen, but you don't have the sort of unlimited resources you would want. And I think that sort of thing has been missing in a lot of modern filmmaking, is it takes so long in the United States to make new movies. It'll be like 3-4 years between movies nowadays because of how much CGI is used. And this is something that should never be the case with a horror movie, and I think it also kind of just makes these sequels feel weird when you're watching it like a decade later with Avatar or something. You want to strike while the iron is hot because you don't know when things are going to shift again, especially with something like Scream. It's a series that was really speaking to a certain time period and really understood that and had a great sort of meta awareness of itself. And so now it was trying to continue that and get even more meta, and you can see that within this film. And I think Kevin Williamson, someone who was very busy at this time, because you have Scream that was just very successful, which allowed him then to get to work on something like I Know What You Did Last Summer, which was a young adult adaptation into a slasher movie. He also had his show Dawson's Creek that he was developing. So he was a really busy man at this time, but he still was able to produce this screenplay. Wes Craven had to write a lot of sort of little moments, like he had to rewrite little things as production was going along, because Williamson was just too busy to be able to do a lot of the rewrites. So this was more of a collaboration again between Craven and Williamson. And there was supposedly like a leak of the killers, and this sort of supposedly kind of made them have to change some things around and really tighten security. Though according to Williamson, these were just dummy endings that were attached onto a lot of different screenplays, so that if they were leaked, it really didn't matter as much. So that is kind of interesting, but it does show you that there was a lot of interest being generated, even in the early days of the internet and all this stuff about the fandom of Scream, is that they wanted to know who the killers were. But it feels like that kind of undermines a lot of the fun of being a fan if you already know who the killers are before you go and see it in the theaters. I think another thing that really spoke to the pop culture sort of icon status that Scream had at that moment was the unbelievable cast they were able to get surrounding their core sort of main surviving cast members. One of the biggest gets and one of the biggest names that a lot of people mention nowadays is Sarah Michelle Gellar. Now, I don't know how big of a star she was at the time, but it seems like when you look back, this was kind of the moment that her star was really rising within sort of the horror community. Buffy the Vampire Slayer had just started airing on television. She was in I Know What You Did Last Summer as well that year. So she was really becoming a horror icon right at this moment. And it reminds me a little bit of like in nowadays you have something like Scream 5 that came out. Jenna Ortega was starring, and that was right in a moment for her where she was starring in X, she was starring in Scream, and then she also ended up starring in Wednesday, the television show for Netflix. All these roles sort of releasing all together really does sort of help rise your stardom within a community if you really are making hit after hit after hit in such a small little cycle of time. It really raises your image, which is really cool. I mean, Sarah Michelle Gellar is obviously an icon within the horror sort of film industry at this point, but at the time she was really making a lot of great hits in a row. Now, I'm not really a huge fan of I Know What You Did Last Summer, but I still can appreciate a lot of her performances within the horror genre. And I think being able to watch her back now, it's really cool to see her in a movie like this, even if it is in a small role, where she's kind of like replicating the Casey Becker death scene, though with a little bit less impact. And I think that's one of the things about this movie is it is really replicating a lot of things that happened in the original movie, but to some slightly lesser impact. One, because now it's just kind of a redux of what we've already seen, but also because we don't care as much about these characters, and things are becoming a little bit too meta for their own good in some instances. This being too meta for your own good is really already apparent from the very opening scene, which is almost like a complete, like, huge dose of fan service right at the beginning. So, what we find out in the very opening scene is that, in fact, the events of Scream have now been immortalized on the screen as a horror movie called Stab based on the book by Gale Weathers. And so we're watching Stab on a screen with other audience members as we are ourselves presumably in a theater watching Scream 2 on the big screen. And it's replaying events that we've already seen from the original movie, but now done in this weird fake Hollywood version. And this is really clever and smart and fun, but it also kind of is an example of how things get a little bit too meta for their own good. It becomes too fan servicey and too much like let's just throw whatever at the wall and try and be like metaception, I guess, without actually having any of the heart and sort of depth that we had in the original. And I think that that is present because we don't care about most of these characters. The opening characters we don't care about at anywhere of a level that we do with Casey Becker. We don't see their family, we don't see any of the effects of their deaths. It's just simply because they're names that they're picked on. And that I just find that to be a bit of a less impactful way of dealing with character deaths than we saw in the original movie. And we're starting to see that really the movies themselves are becoming sort of like the desensitized characters we had in the original, which can only see things through the lens of movies. And so that's what we're kind of seeing happen in Scream 2. While the performances in that opening scene are solid, we don't care as much because Drew Barrymore, first of all, gave an amazing performance in the original, and it was a much more tense and well-directed scene. But also, we're more like appreciating the cleverness of the sort of movie within a movie thing than we are actually scared about what's happening. We're also not seeing the parents' reaction, which I think was one of the underrated or maybe under talked about moments of that opening. It's so heart wrenching to see the parents sort of come home and be nervous, and then the mom finding her dead daughter. It's just so brutal, and I think that that is one of the big differences already that's present in here is that's the heart of the movie. That's the core that makes the deaths matter. It's not just this sort of desensitized look at violence and oh look, this person dies, isn't it fun when this person dies? The death scenes actually matter, and their deaths are actually important and relevant because they're real humans, or at least in their universe they're real humans. They're not just disposed of as like just empty bodies that don't matter at all and only serve as a tool to further the plot. Instead, they actually had lives that mattered, and they have loved ones that will remember them. And I think Scream 2, we're immediately seeing the effects of sort of the dropping of that, right? Of the weakening of that core concern with humanizing the victims. And then as we go along, there is a lot of sort of replicating moments of the original. Right now, we're in college with Sydney and her sort of found family of survivors from the original movie. And she's getting a new boyfriend, she's getting new friends, she's trying to get over it, right? She's trying to move on with her life, but she's still obviously dealing with the PTSD of another new sort of brutal cycle of killings around her. She's feeling like she's a cursed person, and that's kind of where the tie-in with Cassandra in the play, that's sort of another meta reference that's meant to sort of represent her own character, and that's something that's done in a lot of horror movies. So it wasn't like the most clever idea, but it is smart to do something like that. But then you have, like like I said, the Casey Becker death scene is basically replicated here with Sarah Michelle Gellar's character CC Cooper dying, but that scene just has less of an effect. It's still cool to see because we love Sarah Michelle Gellar as horror fans, but that's what it is. It's more just like a fun scene watching her die than anything that really matters or that we care about, and there isn't really any of the effects felt. Nobody really cares, and in fact, her death is sort of like a punchline, like let's go and run and let's look and let's see that, oh my gosh, there was been a murder at the sorority house. That's what how all the desensitized college students are acting. But that's basically how we're supposed to be acting. We're not supposed to really care about this character because we don't have any reason to at all. And then it's really mostly just used as a message to Sydney, like, hey, Ghostface is real, Ghostface is coming to kill you. And then of course we see the first appearance of Ghostface. And Sydney is still a badass in this. She's a great final girl. Her sort of humanity is still very present. Her development and growth as a character is still really fun and captivating to watch. She's still awesome, like, and she's still a reason to watch. And she really makes this a very watchable movie. She makes us care about what's going on, and she really gives a great performance. Neve Campbell does as Sidney Prescott, and she has been carrying this franchise now for 2 movies in a row, and she really does for a huge chunk of the movies. And I think that that is something that is really admirable about this franchise is that they have a really good lead actress who's able to carry a lot of the emotional weight for this series. I think another thing that the CC Cooper death scene really illustrates to me is that it is still a brutal movie. There's still a lot of brutality and really tough kills in it, but they have less weight because we don't care about these characters very much. And instead, it's like a fun sort of brutality, which was against kind of the point of Scream. Scream was trying to say, hey, look, these deaths actually matter. I mean, it had some fun deaths too, but it also was talking about how these things are not just a movie, they have real impact. And a lot of these deaths are just kind of done in a way of either replicating things that worked in the original or just kind of serving as padding of the runtime because we need a death here, we need a death there. We need to continue to keep the audience's engagement throughout this movie. And I just find that a bit disappointing. Now, that being said, I do enjoy a lot of the meta aspects. I do think it's a fun movie to watch, but it does just have a little bit less of an impact. And it also doesn't feel as revolutionary as that first one did. It really feels like it's kind of just replicating a lot of the things that worked about the first movie, but it really needed to kind of completely do its own thing, I think, to be able to have anywhere near the impact that the original had. And I don't even know if it would have been possible because that first one is so damn good. It's hard to like completely condemn Scream 2. I think it's a good, fun horror movie. It's just in comparison to Scream, it's like it really doesn't hold up as much. But it is a good movie. It's a very, very fun movie. And I think that's what I enjoy about it. And I think that's what other fans like about it. And that's what kind of Scream devolved into. It's just being more about being a fun time rather than the weight and impact that that original had. Which is fine. It's still an enjoyable series. But I do think that that's kind of a sad reality whenever you become a franchise. And that's just something that happened with almost every slasher franchise anyways. Nightmare on Elm Street never got as scary or as impactful as the original. Even though I enjoy like Dream Warriors, that's more of just a fun horror movie than it is as impactful and scary as that original was. Friday the 13th, I mean, none of them were ever that good to be honest with you, but I do enjoy them as sort of campy movies. Halloween, obviously nothing really lived up to the original either. It just became, let's watch Michael Myers go and kill all these annoying characters, just over and over and over again. I love to see David Arquette and Courtney Cox, their chemistry on screen, their romance, they're developing. It's sort of replicating what happened in the first one again, but their performances are just so much fun with each other, and they just really, I mean, they obviously were a real life couple, so it makes sense that they would have that sort of chemistry on screen as well. And it's just so much fun to watch, and it really just makes you happy. A lot of the romance and stuff that goes on in this movie, even between Sydney and her boyfriend, is just a lot of fun and leaves a smile on your face. The scene where her boyfriend is getting up on the table and singing and dancing it just is a really fun scene, and I enjoy it a lot. Even though at the back of your head, you're like, is he a killer? Are they going to do that again? And that's another thing, though. That just reminds me now, the killer, the way they approached the killers was a lot weaker in this movie as well. So having it be Mickey and Mrs. Loomis, I thought was just a misfire and not really that effective. Mickey, I don't think we really ever got too much of his character in this movie to really get any sort of interiority or understanding of who he is as a person. And then Mrs. Loomis, she was always just this dumb little side character that nobody cared about. that was supposed to be like, oh, look, it's a twist. You didn't expect that. That weird, annoying reporter that's been bothering Gail Weathers the whole time, she was actually Mrs. Loomis. It's like nobody could really have expected that, so it doesn't really work as a whodunit. And it's also just not that interesting because she already left Billy and she's just been like a non factor for all this time. And I really just think it was a cheap way of sort of tying it to the original once again. And I just didn't like it. I didn't think it was effective and it didn't really make sense what their motives didn't really make as much sense and they didn't really have as much weight behind them as you had with the original killers. It obviously there was a big commentary running throughout this movie about violence and cinema and the connections between them, sort of making a political argument in favor of movies being fake. Like you can be able to be responsible adults and be able to understand the differences. But obviously they're saying, look, there was a big cultural moment then in the 90s, especially after things like Columbine and different other violent moments in which they were examining video games and movies and trying to understand why they thought the youth were becoming violent people. And they thought, let's blame the movies, let's blame the music, let's blame the video games. And I think there was a big pushback, from the arts side against this. And this is one of those films that really was pushing back against that idea. And I think Craven was pushing a lot of his frustrations with this sort of commentary that is so flippant and stupid and not really understanding what it's critiquing. So that is kind of one of the only interesting little angles that Mickey's sort of idea about, I want to get caught so I can make the argument that the movies made me do it. Like, that's kind of interesting, ties into sort of the social commentary of the movie, which I think is a smart way of doing things. But to be honest, it just doesn't hit at anywhere the same level as the original Killers did. And look, I think that Timothy Olyphant gives a good performance. I think Laurie Metcalf gives a good performance. I just don't think that they're working with as good a material here. And I think that, in general, that's kind of an example, once again, of why this movie is just slightly worse than the original in a lot of different ways that add up and make it substantially worse. It's still a good movie. But compared to the masterpiece, the great, the excellent, the gold standard that is the original Scream movie, it really does fall short in a lot of key areas. Though it is, like I said, a really fun time at the movies, and so it's kind of hard to be too critical of it, but because of the ability that they were able to demonstrate with that first movie, the ability to speak to the horror genre in such stark terms and say, look, this is how you do it. What you guys have been doing is not the most effective way of making a horror movie, and we can actually make you care about the characters. We can actually make everything, every moment, every element of this plot matter and make you care, and it not just be a filler and not just be something that is just thrown away as we wait for the next scene of nudity or murder, and instead actually showing you the impact of violence and being able to have a commentary on violence and the way that violence is depicted in the media and the way that that's desensitizing us. All that stuff is so effective in the first one, and it's sort of like they're just reheating their own nachos here, and it just does not work as well. I also want to talk a little bit about Ghostface here. I mean, I will say one of my favorite parts of the original movie was how kind of clunky and silly Ghostface was, while at the same time that also it showed again the weird mixing that they were able to do. You have him being like a clunky, clumsy little ghost that's kind of silly at times, right? Like there's that scene in the original where he's literally just walking through the woods near that house that Tatum and Sydney are at when they're talking about her mother. And that's just a ridiculous scene. But at the same time, the fact that it is just such a familiar, kind of stupid costume that anybody could get is what makes it terrifying. And the fact that you can tell it's obviously a human behind that mask and behind those robes, and the violence that's enacted within that is just, it kind of adds a layer of realism and depth to the killings that you don't really get in your standard slasher movie where you have a supernatural 6'8" boogeyman going around chasing everybody. And I think once again this was effective. You really are kind of scared by Ghostface, and it's a really effective design choice. It makes the killers a lot more scary before they're unmasked. Once they're unmasked, it's like, okay, how ridiculous and campy and over the top psychotic can you be? But when they are masked, they are really scary, at least to me. While at the same time having a little bit of clumsiness and humor. It's a weird mix, but it's usually pretty effective. And once again, they nail it in this movie. They nail the right balance with Ghostface that makes it a fun movie while still having actual brutal kills in it. Another aspect of social commentary they infuse in this movie is the stronger sort of representation of African Americans within it, and talking about their relationship with horror movies. And that is kind of funny and it's enjoyable. At the beginning they have Jada Pinkett and her character and her interaction with the horror movie that is Stab, and it's interesting, it's fun, but it's kind of tossed aside as the movie moves along. It's really just kind of a thing to throw in there, just as another level of sort of meta commentary on race and horror, which is something that was completely absent from the first movies with mostly white people. And I think that it makes it kind of it's another little fun element, but it's not really a super strong thematic thing that they bring in. It's just something that's kind of tossed in there as just a sort of way of filling the time, which I think it could have maybe been explored a little bit more, but it ultimately wasn't. And once again, sort of feminism is again, a strong point in this movie. Maybe not as much as in the original, but once again, we really get a strong final girl in Sydney, in her growth, in her development, and also in the growth and development of Courtney Cox's character, Gale Weathers, who goes from this inhuman, like sociopathic news reporter to finally finding her humanity with the way that she sort of falls in love with Dewey, and the way that she realizes she's hurting people, and the way she realizes that being a victim sucks, and it really just it takes over your life, and all you want is to not have it happen and continue to happen. And her growth and development as a character is really one of the more fascinating elements of this movie, and I think it really is handled well. And again, it ties into to the relationship between Dewey and Gale, which I think is one of the strengths of this movie. So yeah, I think that feminism again is a strong element here. The final girl, once again, it's about Sydney's development into a complete badass, which she was by the end of the first movie, and she's continuing that development while also still keeping her vulnerability as a human being, which I think is really a key to the effectiveness of the horror. Is when we do care about Sydney and we want her to survive and we want these things to stop happening to her, and we feel bad that she's continually haunted by this violence that's just cyclically happening in every stage of her life. Yeah, this is a brutal, fun, effective horror movie, one that obviously doesn't stack up against its original, but is still a really, enjoyable time that I think most horror fans would appreciate, and I think this is definitely one that is something that I'm a fan of. I like the Scream series. Scream 1 and 2 are both really good movies, and so I can't wait to talk with you guys about Scream 3 tomorrow. So that's all I really have to say about this movie. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications every time I drop a new video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
You know what I mean? Another.
T2.
You've got a hard on for Cameron.
Big one.